to Black Men Speak. I'm your co-host, J.R. Stewart.
And good evening, everyone. I'm your co-host, Tommy Duncan.
Okay. We want to thank everyone for joining us. Our show airs live every Wednesday, 9 p.m. Central Time. Please come and join us. Please spread the word. Subscribe, like, and share is what we ask you to do. So if you're not a subscriber, please subscribe. Hit the little bell, the notification bell, and you will be updated every time we upload a new video, which is weekly. So, Tom, what do we have on the schedule for tonight?
Well, we're going to talk about one of our heroes and revolutionaries, Denmark BZ, and then we're going to spend a little time on current events, the protests for social justice in America a little bit, and we're going to see if we can fit that in within our time frame this evening.
I'd almost hate to mix the two to some degree, although there are similarities in an effort to fight against injustice. But I think that's where the comparison stops, because what's going on today is hard for me to put that in any kind of context to make it right. Which to me, if we do that, we need to be careful in that, because I don't want to take away from legitimate protests against social injustice. Not to say that there's not some elements of legitimacy to this protest, but Tom, there's a lot wrong with what's going on today.
That's true, and I think that where both of them do cross paths is that you have groups of people, same descendants of Africans who were brought to America to build the greatest country in the world, and you have two groups of people during two different periods in our history who are fighting for their humanity, fighting for their freedom, fighting for their ability to be able to live as human beings.
Okay, Tom, but past movements compared to today, now we've talked about this before, that I think we dishonor our ancestors, those who came before us, those who fought, died, shed blood and skin to help get us to a point where we are today. When you're destroying property, setting things ablaze, injuring others, looting, stealing, it takes away from the legitimate protest of those who are fighting for a good cause. And I think we dishonor our ancestors, if we try to blend what they did and their contribution to what's going on today.
But what you have to acknowledge is that the core movement, the core protest, and the core is the peaceful protest all across the country, is fighting against social justice. There are opportunists out there who are taking advantage of a situation with a door that is open by those who are protesting peacefully in order to create havoc and mayhem. And you're talking about folks of several different classes and cultures who are the opportunists. But the core group of folks who are protesting peacefully are folks who are just saying, we want justice, we want humanity, we want to be treated as human beings without being targeted by law enforcement or by folks who feel that they want to assert their will on anybody. And so I would agree with you that there is no room for opportunists, but they're always going to be out there. They've always been out there. They always will be out there. But the core premise of this protest is for justice and humanity.
Okay. Well, I can understand that, and I can certainly agree with the protesters to some degree. I like, for me personally, I like to put things in proper perspective and make sure they're scaled correctly. When so much energy and time is devoted to what equates to maybe 12 to 20 deaths a year by of black unarmed people by the police. When I compare that to other situations, somehow this does not rise to this level of reaction. The police are not our, to me, the police are not our biggest threat. You know, as a black man, I have a 95% chance of being killed or murdered by another black person. And so, when I look at the comparison of who I need to be afraid of, do I need to be afraid of white police officers? Well, my chance of being killed by a white police officer statistically is almost zero, compared to my chance of being killed by another black person.
Well, if we look at it statistically, Jimmy, if we look at black on black crime, which is in the upper 80%, and white on white crime is in the mid to upper 80%, they're about on par with each other. So really the greatest threat to white people is white people, and the greatest threat to black people may be black on black crime. But at the end of the day, when you have a group that of tax-paying supported law enforcement officers whose job is to serve and protect their community and the ones that they serve, you should not feel that you are being threatened by the folks who are supposed to be protecting and serving you. And if you look at it statistically speaking, it has been documented that over 1,000 people are killed by law enforcement every year. Not all of them are black, but a significant enough number of them are black, and a significant number of them are black men. And maybe they're putting their necks on white men's necks too, but unfortunately they didn't catch the cameras. But for whatever reason, they're continually caught on camera, killing them, lynching them, or whatever you want to call it in 21st century language. But the people have had enough. It's been, you can't get past the Ahmaud Arbery situation until you get to the Breonna Taylor situation, until you get to the George Floyd situation. And something has to give. Something has to stop. And I believe people of all groups have gotten to a point where they're just frustrated with what they're seeing in the streets in broad daylight, and something has to give. And this is it.
Now, Tom, is this a legitimate frustration? Now, one death is too many by the police, but what's the alternative? We certainly don't want a situation.
I mean, you can call it a death. Death by natural causes is okay, but being murdered by a law enforcement officer in the middle of the street,
and once again,
someone whose knee is on your neck,
which is bad
because of what was it? They tried to get this guy because of I think what they supported was a counterfeit $20 bill.
That is correct.
That is a license to die.
That is not a license to die. That should have never happened, and it's very unfortunate for Mr. Floyd and his family. So there is no excuse for the police officer who has you in custody and in control and handcuffs to use such a tactic. But with that being said, what's the alternative? We cannot get rid of our police. You know, that cannot happen because these people that you say are opportunistic, I call them thugs and terrorists, would certainly take over our streets if we didn't have some form of law enforcement. So most law enforcement are good people, just out trying to do their job. Some of them are frustrated. They're human also. Eventually, the toll. This is not to make an excuse for any of them, but I can only imagine. See, I wouldn't do that job. Dealing with people who lie to me every day, who are parasites on society, who are stealing, doing all kind of evil and bad things every single day. This is what you deal with. Most of us do not come into contact with these kind of people on a daily basis. 8 hours a day, 10 hours a day, every single day. That has to take its toll on you at some point. But I'm glad that there are people out there who are willing to do that job, because I wouldn't do it. If I did, I can imagine that I would have to turn to alcohol or drugs or some other form of abusing other people to release that frustrated energy that I have built up, that gets built up on a daily basis.
I can't disagree with you in terms of the difficulty of protecting and serving our communities and having to deal with bad actors every day. That is probably one of the toughest jobs that you can have, probably along nowadays with being a teacher and some other professions. But when you consider this, when our communities in particular have been attacked and or been victimized constantly, year after year, decade after decade, it never stops in our communities. There are certain communities out there that are protected and served, but there are other communities out there that are victimized. And on top of that, The black male is the number one target when it comes to victimization, exploitation, and or outright murder and lynching. And the problem is this. There are a few bad actors, and the majority of law enforcement officers, I believe, their heart is in the right place, but you have too many law enforcement agencies who are allowing these rotten apples to stay within their organization and to destroy the reputation and the fiber of law enforcement culture in America. That is a problem. This is not an accident. This is not a rare incident. This is something that is systemic, unfortunate, throughout the country. It's not just happening in Minneapolis. It's not just happening in New York City. It's not just happening in Omaha, Nebraska. It's not just happening in Louisville, Kentucky. It's happening all over the country. And when you have a culture within an organization, not just in one city, but nationwide, systematic, same problems over and over again, that is not just an accident. And whether it's those few bad actors that are allowed to stay, the culture that advocates that and turns the other cheek is a problem just as much as the person who is the bad actor who is lynching black men in the street. Okay, this guy was being video recorded. He knew he was being video recorded. He did not have the decency to say, you know what, maybe I'm going overboard. And the biggest problem, Jimmy, is you had 3 other law enforcement officers who sat by and watched this man die, murder, be lynched.
Well, I think they're all being dealt with, Tom. I think the state is
three of them are still at home chilling. Only one has been arrested.
No, one has been charged with second-degree and third-degree murder.
One out of 3.
A second officer has been charged with felony murder, which I believe has been taken into custody. The other 2 will be charged eventually. I'm not sure when that's going to happen, but is there any culpability, and I say of us, and I say us, I mean black men, do we bear any culpability in this development, how things have evolved to this point? Consider this, Tom, that a law enforcement officer is 4 times more likely to be killed by a black man than any other group, woman, white, Hispanic, young, old, elderly, doesn't matter. However you want to divide the groups up. The black male between 18 and 45, a white officer is 4 times more likely to be killed by that black person, does not now bear any factor in any of this.
Jimmy, considering the victimization of black men in America since we were dragged to America, let's flip the script on this. If it was 4 black law enforcement officers who had their knee on a white man's neck in broad daylight, any day of the week that went viral, all of these men would already be in jail. All of them would already be in jail.
The same process we play out, Tom. You do have a black officer who have been arrested and charged for killing suspects. So it does happen.
I understand that. I'm not saying it hasn't happened. But when you look at the numbers, and we're talking about adult men,
okay,
we're talking about children, teenagers, it is as if there is a license to kill black men regardless of their age.
Tom. So we should not put that out there as if there is, because there's no truth to that. There is no license to kill black men. There is no conviction.
Well, what do you call it, Jimmy? I mean, let's talk about what happened in Louisville earlier this week. We're talking about a man who was law enforcement friendly.
Yes, he
was
was
trying to help his niece.
That's
who
correct.
Shot and killed in broad daylight. This is a man who fed law enforcement officers in his community, was a friend to the law enforcement officer. It's just very odd that it just happens to be black men who get in the way of bullets.
Tom, I think that what you're pointing out is reporting of information. So if you don't hear it, if it's not reported, you assume that it doesn't happen. But that's, like I said, that's not to excuse any action. That's not what I'm assuming at all. But I'm going to go back. But I want to go back to your previous example.
Just the tip of the iceberg. That's the problem.
Okay, let's go back to your previous example.
It's just the tip of the iceberg. That's the problem.
I don't think it is the tip of the iceberg. I think the iceberg is well reported. because you have those who make sure they want to tell this story to get it out there to push their own cause. But let's go back to your previous reversal example. You said a black officer that did this to a white person. What do you think the response would be, Tom? You said, okay, one, you think the officer would be arrested a lot quicker. Okay, I'll give you that. But would white people be burning up their own neighborhoods as a response to it? Would they be rioting and looting, throwing bricks, damaging property, injuring people? Now, you also have law enforcement officers who are doing their jobs who are being injured during this process. You know, some of them serious, some of them not so serious, but still, this is a human. I mean, the human capital that's been expenditure on this, both good and bad, does not rise to this level of one death, of the reaction for what should happen over one death.
Jimmy, if it was one death, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. If it were just one death, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
Okay, but Tom,
the country wouldn't be having this conversation if it were just one death. You tell me,
when is there ever going to be a time when no black man in America will ever be killed by a white officer? When's that ever going to happen? There's always going to be a case that's going to happen at some point. And then when it happens, the response is going to be, well, collectively, historically, this has always happened, so I'm going to go back to day one and let all that energy build up and then go out and riot, burn down my neighborhood in protest.
Well, see, this is the difference. And to answer your question, is white folks would not have to go out and protest and burn down things to get people's attention, because the reality of it is they would have already been locked up, they would have already been charged, they would have already been tried, and they would have already been in jail by now. So white folks, this is the point, white folks don't have to do that to get people's attention to say this is not going to happen on our watch. Unfortunately, it's black folk who have to go to this extreme level of protest to get people's attention. It's like, look, this has to stop now.
Tom, that's where I'm going to disagree with you once again. I don't think we have to go to that degree. I think the motion...
Well, you're right. You know what? Because
hold on for a second. The wheels
require one person kneeling on a football field and they're ready to tear the country down.
Okay, hold on, Tom. The wheels are already in motion without the protests, without the riots, without anything. The wheels are already in motion to file charges against the officer in this case. Civil rights charges were being brought and looked at by the federal government over this before any of the riots were starting to take place. So I think, in order to satisfy the argument of do you have to do this to get attention, well, let's try not rioting. Let's try not being unlawful and see. Now, if a week later, 2 weeks later, they're trying to sweep it under the rug, then I'll say, okay, well, now's the time to maybe up your effort, not to go to this degree to be unlawful, but even the protest itself to some degree is unlawful, because generally you have to get a permit to protest in a large number. You have designated areas where you can go. You don't have the right to stop interstate commerce. You don't have the right to stop traffic. I have a right, because I'm a taxpayer, to drive down the street without being accosted or having the intersection blocked by protesters. So people don't have the right to inconvenience other people because they think what they're doing is just. So we should maybe try exercising some discipline to see what the outcome would be before we jump to the conclusion that this is the only way we can get attention to an injustice.
But Jimmy, if you have all the evidence right in front of you, I mean, I guess the question would be this, and this is the reason, unfortunately, one of the reasons that it got to this point. So the incident happened. David Chauvin, murdered this man in broad daylight.
Yes, he did.
It was recorded by several people. Obviously, the camera went to the authorities. It was picked up by the authorities. And the attorney and the DA and the mayor come out and make these statements. Well, it takes time to make sure that you have the appropriate amount of evidence, and these things, take time to process. And after having multiple incidents where it takes 2 to 3 months to charge and pick up someone decided, you know what, not today. Because if you have evidence on camera right in front of you showing the entire event, 10 to 12 minutes, someone lynching someone in public, and the DA says we have to figure out whether we have enough evidence to charge. Someone said not today.
Well, Tom, they don't have
that was when that was unfortunately that the DA and the mayor making those statements, telling the public we've got to figure this out, whether there's enough evidence. We've got to take some time to determine whether there's enough evidence to charge this officer is what really was the powder keg, or the light in the powder keg, and really initiated the protest.
Well, Tom,
it wasn't really until that, Jimmy, in this case, that is when the entire country went ballistic, because they unfortunately told America we've got to take time to figure this out when it was all on tape.
Okay, I'm not going to do a Glenn, so it wasn't the entire country because I didn't go ballistic. But once again, these are our processes. You can't rush to judgment on when the state is coming after you, especially when law enforcement
rush to judgment when you have
you cannot rush to judgment when a law enforcement officer is involved in this, because one, it is very difficult to convict the police. How many times have we seen tapes? Rodney King. How many times have we seen cases where law enforcement are involved, a person is dead, and they go to court, they go to trial, and what happens? The jury ends up not convicting the officers. It is very difficult to get that conviction. You cannot.
So, Jimmy, what you're telling me is that you can videotape someone killing someone in broad daylight, and you don't have enough evidence to at least.
What I'm saying is that there are mitigating circumstances when it comes to law enforcement officers. You have to determine how much force are they authorized to use in this situation, whether the force was reasonable or not. I mean, you have to do some examination before you just go put cuffs on an officer. You have to do that, Tom, because that's the process. If you don't do that, no one's going to be an officer. You can't treat officers like the public. Now, the public, you just need reasonable cause or probability to do an arrest. Okay, that person is dead. I think you had something to do with it. There's witnesses here. There's evidence. Cuff, let me throw you in jail, and then we'll figure it out. But with law enforcement officers, they're given a reasonable doubt, and you have to give some time to make sure that you examine every aspect of it before you arrest them or charge them with something. Because if you don't, if you rush it and do it too soon, guess what? That person is dead. There's no conviction, and the officer walks free, and probably sued for wrongful termination.
What you're telling me, Jimmy, is that a video recording of someone killing someone in the middle of the day, broad daylight, is not enough evidence to charge.
Tom, what I'm saying is we don't know the statutes of Minnesota, of the city or the state. We don't know what their authorization of deadly force or. Okay, so
it was the DA who was speaking.
Yes, he was speaking, and he does, and they have to go back and examine every.
And right after he said it's got to take some time for us to determine whether this video of this law enforcement killing this citizen is enough evidence for us to charge, and then the city went ballistic. Then, you know what? All of a sudden, we found that there was enough evidence.
Well, Tom, once again, those charges came days later, and I'm pretty sure.
It came the next day after.
I'm pretty sure the first charge was third-degree murder, which is a lesser.
But it was a charge. It was a charge.
It was a charge, and that was only after the coroner's report said that the placing of the knee on the person's Mr. Floyd's neck did not kill him, but it maybe contribute to his death. Since it contributed to his death, then just a determination, was this reasonable or excessive? So once they made that determination, they filed the charges. Then it came back and upgraded the charges to second-degree murder after more examination. I'm saying murder charges don't normally come that quickly for anybody. For most people, there is a length of time from when a person is dead and when charges are filed for murder, especially for first-degree murder. So the higher the degree, the more time is given to make sure that you have the right charge. Now, in this case, I actually think that they may end up upgrade the charge to murder one. And the reason I think that is because if they want a second degree murder or second degree murder, a third degree murder conviction, that if they file murder one, they may be able to do a plea deal to murder two and make this go away. But I'm not sure that this is going to go to court. If it does go to court, it will be second degree murder. If they upgrade to first degree murder, I don't think it will go to court. I think they'll plead out to second degree murder, and then we'll see what happens. But the process is playing itself out legally, and I don't think it would have taken all of the destruction of personal property, private property, and of human life for this to happen. I just don't. So I believe in the system a little bit more than some people who are a little more skeptical than I am.
Well, the system works for some people, and unfortunately, it doesn't work for a lot of others. That's just the way it is.
I think, Tom, the system works for most of us most of the time. Is it perfect? No. Are there bad apples?
I'm not talking about perfect, but is it fair and equitable across everyone?
I think it's fair for most people most of the time. There are some times when it's not fair. So, but life is not fair. There is no such thing as fairness that's uniformly applied across the board. That would be perfection, Tom, and there is no such thing as perfection.
It is fair for people with wealth and privilege. That's about it.
Now that I would give you. I'm not going to argue against that.
Okay, and that is the minority, not the majority.
The system is certainly fair to those who have some influence. Well, I don't know about necessarily all the wealth and privileges, but that certainly helps. I think wealth and privileges buy you influence, and more importantly, it's the influence that may help you in the long run more than anything else. That just the fact.
Man, we got a little bit less than 3 minutes.
Do we?
So we
didn't even talk about our person of interest today.
I know that, so it looks like we're gonna probably have to do that next week.
Okay. So let's take the last couple of minutes to offer some suggestions, to, because once again, this will happen again. Maybe not in this fashion, but it will certainly happen again. There's going to be another altercation between a white officer and a black person, and the black person is going to die. So what are the solutions here? What can we do besides destroying the black community, the black business structure, not even just the black business structure, but also the economic base in the black community when it happens again?
I think first there has to be a very strong and hard reevaluation and a program of police reform. We've talked about prison reform in this country.
We've already passed prison reform.
People, unfortunately, we all know that prisons they call them corrections institutions, but they correct very little. And so people talk about prison reform, which actually prepares people to go out and be productive citizens. And I know that what people are going to be talking about is reform. When we talk about justice and the adjudication of justice in this country, you have to start looking at structural changes to the way in which law enforcement is carrying out its mission, because it is hurting too many people and killing too many people unnecessary. That is one thing. Number two, in this country, everything begins and ends with money. So whenever you talk about your strategy, when it relates to anything, politics, law enforcement, anything that you want to talk about, it ends and begins with leveraging your economic capital.
Well, Tom, you bring up a couple of good points. So prison reform has already happened. The Second Chance Act has now been law for over a year now.
That is not structural prison reform. That is a tactic.
I don't know about that. So we'd have to maybe talk about that at another topic as the validity of that. But the other part, as far as the structural reforms within the police departments, those are local decisions made by local leaders. So if you're not involved with your local leadership, if you're not getting involved with your local leadership, getting out and voting, being a volunteer, running for office, if you're not changing from the within, then you certainly can't continue to complain from without. So we have to get involved. And then on top of that, I would encourage more people of color, black, Hispanic, Asians, to join the police department, become part of that force, and change the mindset from within. So if officers have a wrong view of black people, they're not going to change that by coming into contact with all the criminal elements within the black community. They're going to have to change that from coming in contact with some decent black people who are reasonable to show that there is a balance to this. So if you're not going to become part of the solution, continuing to fight from without, is not going to be an answer. Especially when you're fighting with bricks and bats and Motel cocktails and burning things up. That is not going to. That may get some of the news attention, but it's not going to ultimately change. That's going to actually encourage just the opposite. That's going to encourage in the long run for law enforcement to get tougher on quote unquote thuggish people. With that being said, Tom, I'm going to give you the last word.
I would say that in closing things out, and this is a very broad statement, but I would agree with you when it comes to the political process. You have to get engaged with the political process. I have, because I work in the technology industry, but I also work in the law enforcement industry.
Yes, you do.
And looking at the face of that on both sides of the equation, you do have to get actively engaged with what is going on in law enforcement. But even over and above that, most of your police chiefs are appointed. Sheriffs are hired. Sheriffs have dominion over your county structure, but police chiefs are appointed by the mayor. So you do have to get politically involved in the process and leverage your influence to ensure that you are getting people who not only have the right skill set, but who have the integrity to ensure that all of the citizens are served in that community. So it's not just the police chief, because at the end of the day, the police chief has no power that isn't given to him by being selected by the mayor. So you have to get politically involved, you have to become politically astute, and you also have to understand the local statutes in your community, because you need to understand what law enforcement has a right to do and what you have a right to do and what your protections are within the law itself. So those are the things that we can at least begin to start educating ourselves so that we can understand the power that we have, because we do all have power, but we have no power if we don't understand what our rights are.
That's true, Tom. So I want to add to that, Tom, that if you have a local review board that's made up of citizens for your city, get involved. Like Tom said, volunteer, vote, help organize, but also get involved with your local politics, know who your players are, and change the system from within. If you think the amount of force that officers are using is excessive, help change and rewrite the rules and the policies and the statutes. Don't let those things sit on the books and be used as a tool to justify a murder that we've seen in Minneapolis. So with that being said, Tom, we're going to say goodbye to our folks today. And we want you to please spread the word, subscribe to our channel, help share the information, and please hit that notification bell so you'll be notified. And then come back next Wednesday, 9 p.m., when the show airs live. We do have the live comment board active now that I will check and we'll read your comments. And then lastly, our phone number will change yet again. We're going to put in a new phone number. The Google Meet conference didn't quite work for us, so we will go back to a regular phone number. And actually, Tom, I'm going to put in, get a cell phone just for Black Men Speak for people to call in on. So until next week, we're out of here.
Have a good evening.
Have a good evening.